Hey, welcome back, everyone, to the Robert Timmons Show. Today, our guest is James Owen Roberts, a two times Paralympian, Beijing 2008, London 2012. He is a motivational speaker, an entrepreneur, transformation coach, a podcast host, and coaches on diet and mindset. Welcome to the show, James. How are you today?
I'm very well, thanks, Rob, and thank you for the introduction.
Absolutely. Hey, that's your journey, and that's definitely what we want to talk about today, too. Where are you calling in from today, James?
I'm speaking to you from North Wales.
Wow, that's pretty cool. I don't know a lot about the sectional areas of. I know when you say you or London or England, you don't. Wales is definitely separate, right?
When it comes to sport, that most definitely, and you being Canadian, you can relate to the south of the border not being called an American. So, yeah, it's very much. It's probably very tribal. Obviously we coexist for everything else, but I think when it comes to sport, and this is one question you didn't ask me when you sent it across. I've never made a Commonwealth Games, so I've never experienced the opportunity to Welsh obviously call it the fatherland, but for me it's my mother's, and then her father's the Welsh side. But I've never actually qualified to do a Commonwealth Games, but I've done the one above it, and for everybody athletes, it's normally the stepping stone to the Olympics.
Mm.
But if I give some context so people know and you know why, it's actually more difficult for a Paralympic athlete to make a Commonwealth Games than it is the Paralympics. And the last opportunity I had was when I was swimming, and the person that was in my event was the world record holder. So they
Oh
based the
wow.
qualifying time off it's a percentage of the world record. So the times are a lot easier to make the Paralympic, which is it kind of blows your mind. It's like, well, that's not right. Um, Ultimately, freestyle was not my discipline anyway, so I wasn't likely to beat the Australian. So I think that's the only time where I've kind of put it down, and it's only recently when I've taken up the sport of wheelchair basketball, and they've brought in the free-on-free version of the game in both the able-bodied and also the Paralympic side that it's come about that I get another opportunity, and it's actually 20 years to the day that I went as a spectator to the Commonwealth Games in Manchester in 2002, and that springboarded my career. So it would be very ironic if I make Birmingham next year, because it will be 10 years to the day that I competed in London, and 10
Mm.
years prior to that I was a spectator. So if I don't make the games, it'd be funny as well, because it's spectator compete spectator. But that's kind of where I've come. That's the kind of the background where I've come from.
Well, I know we're going to get into a little bit of that, but what I just like what you said was it doesn't matter what happens. It'd be kind of funny. A lot of people wouldn't have that mindset for that, right? But it's part of the journey. You got growth no matter what, right? But if it doesn't, full out to where you thought you would be, you don't beat yourself up about it. You enjoy it, anyways, right?
Well, I think if I give some people some perspective of it, I didn't think this would ever come about me having a. I finished my career back in 2013, and my now head coach at the team in World Basketball obviously stalked me on social media, and he kind of went, "Oh, what about doing World Basketball?" So okay, I like the idea. I've always liked basketball, so it kind of gone full circle, and was gonna try. I was gonna try and make it work in the run up to London. It's like, man, it's not gonna work. Full time student as well, doing my postgraduate, and I was traveling back from London, where I was based with the volleyball team, and coming back to university not far away from where I live now, and that was obviously taking its toll. I was like, well, I can't add something else to the mix, because I'm pretty much stretched as it is. But by all means, when I come back from London after the game, I'll give it a shot. And obviously now 9 years later, and I'm still with the same team. Obviously, it's evolved a little bit from being a club side to a regional side, and he, I won't say he pestered me into it. He said, "Why not? Why not try out for the national side and see what have you got to lose?" I was like, making like a little bit of excuses, like, And I think to appease him, I was like, "Oh, okay, why not?" And when we rocked up on the first day for trial, I thought it would be a few cuts on the first day, and they kind of said, "Oh, we're not going to do that because we haven't got the numbers to be able to do that." I'm thinking, well, you're going to cut some people, but because you're inviting people from all corners of the country, and some might not cut the mustard. So they did kind of subtly, the ones that weren't going to make the men's team, you go train with the women, which if you were if you were kind of a tough man, that's probably a bitter pill to swallow. It's like, well, now you're not good enough for the men. Obviously, make up the numbers for the women. And ultimately, I think some of those individuals weren't probably good enough to be with the women's team. It's like, you've fallen by the wayside. And obviously, the pandemic hit beginning of last year, and I was kind of having an upward trajectory in the sport of wheelchair basketball. They'd recently put a regional development center for within GB basketball, not far from where I live. Thinking, okay, this was never in my wildest dreams that I would get a sniff of going back into the national setup. It's pretty far removed from the senior team, but to be having the opportunity, and obviously sport in the UK when it comes to the domestic side of Paralympic sport is non-existent for the last almost 12 months. So if you're not elite and preparing for Tokyo, it's not allowed. So the rules keep changing on that. So I've tried to stay as positive as I can. And I think throughout the summer I was okay. It's like, well, it's not my identity. I've long been able to remove myself as James in the street and James the athlete. Those two people don't exist. They're two one in the same. And just watching sport during that period was enough. And I think obviously as we've progressed, it has annoyed me a little bit more recently that soccer or football still be played, rugby for the able-bodied. It's like, well, the only difference between me and them is a massive paycheck, and you have a full leg, and that's about it. So the disparity between the haves and the have-nots, which I think everybody in the world can relate to, is still too big. It's like, well, why can you do it just because you have more money? And why can't I? But I try not to delve in that too much because that's negative energy, and I don't want to make myself or my family any worse than the media is already doing. It's like, well, okay, I can't. Okay, there may come a time eventually, because we do get emails from our Welsh national coach. Oh, you can do your home workouts with they've done like a virtual Zoom for players to be able to. It's like, I don't particularly want to do that because my office is a dining room, and yes, you could utilize a basketball, a tennis ball, and a chair, but that's still not wheelchair basketball in my eyes. And I'm also an entrepreneur. I won't say I've got better things to do, but I could either be spending that time with my own clients or trying to get new ones or come up with new ideas to be able to market myself to like-minded people like yourself, like podcasts, that I know that irrespective if I make the Commonwealth Games team or not, that's probably going to be it for me when it comes to sport. That's going to be your swan song. If I do make it, good. If I don't, I had a nice ride of 2-3 years back in the limelight again. So for me, the likelihood that I make the team have changed slightly again because they've lowered the number of team members that can compete, and then we also have to qualify. So how I've done it in my head, whether or not they do this by regions, Canada's in, because it's not pretty much you've only got the Caribbean to worry about. The Australians are in because they've only got the New Zealanders, and the Australians and the Canadians, which are basketball, are dominant powers when it goes round. So that leaves us with obviously the main island of the United Kingdom, Wales, England, Scotland. Okay, England's probably in because it makes up most of the national team. So the likelihood of us even qualifying is probably slim to none. So, but I've already thought of that. Whereas other team members, I don't know if they've thought about the eventuality of we still have to qualify. There's no guarantee that we go, but I think where this is where is I think a strong suit when it comes to my family. That is pessimistic in terms of what I'm talking about, but my family do that quite well. It's if you looked at it from a different perspective, a contingency plan. I've looked at the worst case scenario. If that to happen, what do I do then after? Because someone's like, this might be their one shot at the top. They're not going to make a Paralympics, so that would be the icing on the cake. For me, that's the only thing missing from my sporting CV. So if
Mm.
it's not there, I'm okay with that because I put that down 15 years ago when I didn't make it to Melbourne in 2006. So for me, it was okay. It's never going to happen, but obviously I've had another crack of the whip at it. So for me, I win either way because I never thought it would materialize again. It's like once I left swimming, the idea of ever representing Wales on the highest stage is like, well, that's not going to happen. So you can kind of put that to one side and keep progressing with your career with it when it comes to GB.
Wow, that's like you put out a lot there. First off, our listeners know that you're definitely an athlete. You retired in 2013. You're getting back into the Commonwealth Games as well, and you mentioned in there, which I want to resurface again. You mentioned uh, they have one extra leg in a sense, right? You kind of mentioned that in what you were just talking about. So bring our listeners back before, you know, what happened? How'd you become a paraplegic? If that's the proper word. I know you were in the Paralympics. What happened to get you in that journey that the listeners don't know about you?
I was born, Robert, with one leg missing. So for me, this is where I can't relate to my now niche of other amputees because I did face trauma. I did face an accident, and the mental upheaval that thus creates of pretty much a comparison of me as my current state versus me as an able-bodied individual. So I have faced adversity in terms of I'll call it an identity crisis as a teenager because I'm trying to find where I fit in society. So the disability was an extra coating on top of that to be able to say I was trying to think into people's head. Well, what did they perceive of me? Whereas most of that was didn't it was non-existent. It was me prefabricating stuff that didn't exist. But to loosely describe, so I don't go off on a tangent, I'm missing my. Let's see if I get it right. I get this wrong sometimes. I don't have my fibula. I don't have my tibia. I've got no. Sorry, I've got no femur. So I've got no femur bone to the top of the leg, and I've got a small fibula and tibia. So in essence, mine is my calf part of my leg attached to my hip. So if we go right back to the conversations my mother had with the radiographer when I was a few days old, they said I shouldn't be able to walk. So
Wow.
that's something that she didn't tell me. And ultimately, as kids do, they progress. Obviously, crawling was a little bit awkward. But once I acquired that skill, couldn't be caught. I eventually learned how to walk with a Zimmer frame and then prosthetic, and then the rest is history. So being told no, obviously you've heard through most of the episode, it doesn't sit well with me. It's like, well, okay, that's a kind of a defeatist attitude. Why not? Or why can't I do it a different way? And then go from there. So it's something I've had to reacquire in business because I lost my way when it came to that a little bit. Because it was like, well, it's very you're very solo, and you think it's you against the world. And I've been now with my business coach for about 2 years. Facebook like to remind me middle of January, and I was like, okay. But because I think why I stay with him so long is because he's ex-forces, and be it with my both my parents were my dad was U.S. Air Force and my mother was a NATO civilian. I can relate to some of the things that he say, and ultimately the things that we're doing as a collective. You can bounce ideas off your own peers as well. What if I was to do this? What's your thoughts? So if it's crap, they're gonna tell you. It's like, well, why don't you try this? Not bite it down completely, but well, this is not quite right. Or if we use my website before it went live, or it is going to go live, it got ripped to shreds. It's like, well, James, it's a lot about you, but nothing about the client. It's like, okay. And this was the only time in business I've done it about blowing my own trumpet, because I'm very subdued, and it's very British like to, go under the radar and have a step up a lip, and kind of get things done. Whereas from the other side of the coin, I should be like my father's side of the family, America, pretty much in your face. Look how good I am, which obviously you probably see just by looking over the for the ones in Niagara Falls, all the advertisements that's on the US side. It's pretty much look at me and look how wonderful I am. I'm not saying everybody in America is like that. That's me
Mm-hmm.
generalizing, but most people have that preconceived idea worldwide as that's what an American is like. So I need to be from one instance. I kind of related to what they said. It's like, yeah, you've got a valid point. My ego don't like it because you've massively stomped on it. And if we probably rewind the conversation probably months before, you were saying for me to do the complete opposite. So it's like it's tit for tat. But I get where they're coming from. It's not all about me when it comes to my work now. It's about results
Mm-hmm.
and ultimately showcasing how do I do it for the client, and pretty much give them the tool back. So I took that on board. My web developer said something similar as what James. It's all about you. Show a bit of adversity of where it's good that you showed the highlights. Let's show the lowlights. And that was fun to do because it's like reminiscing of, oh, I've overcome this, I've overcome that. There's a few things in there that nobody ever knows about me except my family. So that will be something, I won't say unique, but it's something that maybe people didn't
It's you
know
being
about me.
vulnerable, right? It's you being vulnerable, and I think that's the key of what you're getting to is we need to, a lot of entrepreneurs don't realize that people don't want to hear a lot about who you are. They want to know how can you help me? Tell me how you can help me, and so are you the right person for me? What you went through, is that going to help me get to where I want to go? Because it's not about what you've been through. That's great. It's great in a lot of speeches and way to really educate people in that manner. But when it comes to business, it's about providing a service. It's about providing value. It's about helping people lift them up to where they want to go. You're like that bridge to their dream, right? What they're
What's
after.
it's that facilitator, which a lot of people don't like to be. They don't like to be the go-between. For me, I'm actually probably happier than I ever have been. And I did have a conversation with somebody a few months back in Messenger, and that you were a lot more motivational, inspirational as an athlete. Okay, I hear you out. I don't agree, but and why I say that is because pretty much if I'm able to impact one person, even on this episode, the ripple effect that it has. Sport, I think people have to remember is pretty much I did it for me. One sport I had the privilege of having my name on the back of on the jersey. That was weird because swimming and rowing is not like that. The the name on the front of it's more important. And sports film talk about that loads, and I lived and breathed that. My name wasn't important. It was having the opportunity to wear the national colours was as close as I was going to get to what my family has done for like generations of fighting for their nation, irrespective of World War Two, World War One. That was volunteering to for peace.
Right,
I don't
right.
have that opportunity. I didn't have that opportunity because of disability, and that was as close as I was going to get. So for me, the every opportunity to be able to do that, I thought of it as it could be my last. So I pretty much embraced it and didn't. Oh, this is not a regret. This is what I would have liked to done better. Was soak it all in and really soak in the atmosphere of every event, which I didn't do. I pretty much went there for. I'm pretty much, you're told as an athlete, you're here for business, and that's it. You're not a tourist. You're not here to make up the numbers. You're here to. Everybody's there to win, but it's go time, and that's it. All this hoopla and carnival atmosphere, you can enjoy that in the closing ceremony. So for me, I probably pretty much took it to a T as every event. Boom. When people ask you, what was it like competing? Well, pretty much most competitions were the hotel and the venue. That's it. You didn't see anything else of a city. You might have been fortunate enough on some rare occasions to be able to go exploring, but most of the time it was hotel venue. So you could be anywhere. So you could be back home in your training city for all that matters. So
Well, let
it's
me
not.
just grab you here, right here, because I know you're dripping a few things here and there into who you are and what you've done. And if we can just confine it down into, you know, you're going into the 2008 Olympics, right? You've trained, what, tell our listeners, what events are you in? What are you training for? What are you doing? What's your mindset going into the 2008 Olympics, and then talk about how it was that day, how it was, what was going on in your mind, and then all of a sudden, all that training, because it's like 4 years of training most of the time, right? When they're going for
Mine
Olympics.
wasn't. Mine wasn't. That's why that question is a good one, Rob. Mine was 2 years.
Okay.
And that probably surprised people because I made the transition from swimming to rowing in 2006. I was dropped from British swimming in 2000, at the end of 2005. And then obviously took up the mantle of rowing in probably about this time, that 15 years ago. And I was told that first year, don't worry about the World Championships on home soil here in the UK. I was like, I'm not doing that. You go find me a partner to make the boat work, but I'm going. I had a conversation when I got in the car. If you think I'm that good, why would I turn down an opportunity to go to the World Championships? But that's the relentless. I wasn't afraid of uncertainty. It was like, well, okay, I've never been here before. Make it happen. I'm willing to put in the work to do that. And obviously, something's going to make that first world champ. We finished fifth in the end, and I was pointing fingers afterwards. But that's not a regret of it. But I obviously have matured and become a better athlete by the time I obviously got to Beijing of you talking to. And there was obviously a lot of ups and downs through those 2 years. If we fast forward to the 2008 season, I'd battered all my competition in the run up to it on home soil. But then when it comes to the final trial that we do in the double, I didn't turn up. And I mean that physically, mentally. Obviously I was there, and I've never rode any worse before or since I retired in 2009 from the sport. And I obviously made so much of a big deal about going to the Paralympics inside my head. I put it on a massive pedestal, and I couldn't live up to it, and people were like shocked. It's like, who's this person? He's garbage.
Oh wow,
And
that
I got beaten, and they were going to go with the other person. But because of having a great support network that I do in Wales, they were willing to go to court to overturn that, because every time that I beat people in '06, 7, they were given another chance. And in '07, I beat somebody by 30 seconds, and they still gave him a second crack of the whip. And
interesting.
I think with that day, you talked about mindset. I pretty much had like a Kobe or Jordan moment. That pissed me off, because it's like, it's supposed to be final trials. It's set in paper as final trials, but you're going to move the goalpost. So that person ultimately, he got a hiding, but it wouldn't have mattered who it was, as I was going to put them on the chopping block. And we had to rerun the race twice because he fell in the first time. It's like, well, if that's a real race, that doesn't happen. You fell in, that's your fault. So we did it again. I got a better start the second time round, and then obviously beat him by 33 seconds. And what made the confounded that matter even worse, I'm very animated with this because it still irritates me. What are we now, 15 years on? I had to train with him for, I think, about 2 weeks leading up to having to go against him again. And that combination would never compete. So you're thinking, not only are you wasting his time, you're wasting mine, and ultimately I'm probably going to win. You've wasted now, or spurned the opportunity that I just go about my merry way, train in my part of the country, and get on with it, and then obviously come back. Um, so I obviously showed no respect to him. So I was like, I'm not pulling you around this lake. It's pointless. I'm more likely to get injured. So that was a little bit of an ego trip. I should have probably done it, and I would probably got something out of it, because he weighed, I think, 30, 40 kilos more. So say about 60 to 80 pounds more than I did. So it would have been a strength exercise as well. So I should have just done it, and then I would have probably profited. And so we qualified the
But
boat.
that is a huge thing. Ego is something we all battle with. Some go with the flow on that. Like in your case, you're talking about how you went with the flow and you wish you actually learned from that. It's something that I believe everybody battles with on a daily basis. I know when I get a thought, it could be judgment, it could be anything. I go, oh, that's the ego. I'm not going to listen to that. I've gotten to that point where I want to stay and create my choices by what I want to go to, who I want to become, instead of listening to this thought that I'm like, wait a second, that's lack, or that's, something else. And that's ego that's saying you're better than this person. But yet I'm like, wait a second, I want to learn from this person. So it's not that I'm better. I see value in a relationship. Of course, this is hypothetical, and this is just what I'm talking about. But that's a key point that you brought up there, and I really wanted to emphasize that so the listeners kind of see your journey and they can learn from what you're saying, because you're saying some good stuff in such an amazing, learning, empowering manner. But let's go on to 2012. You have 4 years to train. Did you instantly think that you were going to go to from 2008 to 2012? Did you, or
Uh,
was it,
it was it was when we got to the closing ceremony of Beijing, when the cauldron's obviously been dimmed out. I was thinking, well, I like this. I want some more of this. So for me, from a mental perspective, yes, I had one more year in rowing, and I think they were surprised I said yes, but for me it was unfinished business. I wanted to go out on that white horse. It didn't happen, but I was willing to come back for one more last hurrah. And obviously there was a slight change in regime, and he said to me from the get go in that meeting, like, one condition for me to come back is if you beat everybody I put in front of you, it's close shop. Okay, deal. And he stuck to his word. So I think obviously I wanted to repay that favor in that last World Champs, and it wasn't to be. But I was pretty content, as I was the best we could do. We went from round to round. We had a little bit of upheaval in the run up to that games in Poland. My partner got injured, and it was like 50-50 whether or not we go in. So I sat training by myself for 2 months and just go against the clock and all sorts. And the person who beat me in '08, but ultimately I got the seat back because he got injured, and I seized my opportunity. He opened the door and I slammed it behind me. He come back in '09 to trial, and the coach, he put him out against the classification below me to see if he'd be good enough to face me. And obviously, I was just going up and down the course, keep minding my own business. So I asked the other two guys, "Well, what happened? Oh, we beat him." Okay. And this was over a quarter of the distance. So I guess the coach made a decision. It was pointless to put James up against James because as human beings, you're going to lower your performance if the person isn't good enough. I just do enough to beat him. That would be it. So I guess he said, well, you're not going to cut the mustard this year. Next day I had to go against the clock, and the clock is not fun. So I wanted to go as fast as I could to make the pain stop. So I rode. I think I rode the fastest I ever did. Obviously, the conditions help with rowing because if it's a tailwind, you go a bit faster. And that's the fastest I'd ever done it by the kilometer by myself. But if it had been against him, I know in my heart of heart, I wouldn't have done that because I would have just done it as competitors do. If I get over the finish line first, I win. Time doesn't matter. So I appreciated the coach making that decision. It's like, well, if the chap can't beat a classification that was more disabled, it's not going to be really a challenge for James. So I respected that, and that's my assumption. I never had a discussion with the coach about it. I just went about it. Well, this is what we're going to do tomorrow, and just crack on. And then obviously she recovered. We went to Poland, and we had to use the rounds to build because the partnership had been out of kilter for months. So it's very much a sport that timing is key because if you're out of kilter a little bit, it just kills the speed. So
Right.
the first round, not the best. Had to go to the repechage. I think memory won it, make the final, and I think it's anybody's game. But I've seen footage back since, and when we flew back to the UK, I watched it back on Eurosport. Because it was my last games, I went sheet white, and I was like, wow. I know I was nervous, but I didn't think I was that nervous. So I'm thinking, okay, no wonder you had like the jitters. And you asked me in one of the questions on LinkedIn, what was it like in Beijing? Beijing is the complete opposite. I have never been so relaxed, and I'm trying to think. There has been, I think, one occurrence that I was in similar fashion, but not as high key moment. And I can't put my finger on why. I think from a media perspective, we'd, well, a little bit lied to them, but manipulated them to say, well, if we make the final, that's good. If we medal, that's a bonus. Internally in the camp, that wasn't the case. It was medal or bust because our team was there to pretty much wipe the floor with everybody else. So I think a couple of days after, it was hard to swallow because everybody else in the team got medals. And, well, I've got the tracksuit and I've got I think the one that it's written on is like parchment, so it's like Chinese paper, so it's nice. Um, Seemed surprised my own family when we finished, because I said, well, it's the best we could have done. I threw the kitchen sink at it. It wasn't good enough. But you rewind back to '06, I'd be kicking and screaming as well, this, that, and the other. So I think, be it in going from a 19, 20-year-old to somebody like 22 to 23, I'd matured a lot. I was like, well, I've done everything I could. I have no regrets of the years leading up to it. I'm not going to say lucky. I was very fortunate to be given a second chance, and I took it because, yes, I had to up sticks and move for where I was living at for university to move full time to where they're based just outside London. But that was a sacrifice I needed to do to be able to stamp my authority in it. So when London came about, and that was 3 years in the making, when that came about of going full time, for me it was a no brainer. No university. I've got nobody to worry about myself. Do it. What have you got to what have you got to lose? So I deferred my postgraduate study a year, which they were fine about. Let's see what happens if I don't make I don't make the crack. I don't make it within a year. Go back and go to university and finish my postgraduate study. Um, and then obviously that didn't happen, and he had to balance the two. But I think London, for me, and this is where family have a disagreement a little bit sometimes with my mom. Is like, well, you should have gone into media. Like, mm, yeah, but where would I be now? We don't know. I might not be in employment because of a pandemic. But for me, because I know a lot of athletes that retired because of injury, and I've posed them that question, if you had had a different outcome and you could have competed in London at home, would you have taken it? Yep, I'd bite your hand off to do it. So that's my argument. And then when I do speak to other athletes, be Americans or whatever, and they've got an upcoming home games, I was like, if it's your end of the career and you can hold out, do it because you won't regret it. And if it happens to be your first games and you don't suffer with stage fright of pretty much being on a pedestal because every media outlet will want a piece of you, you've got pretty much an impartial crowd, a partisan crowd that's going to lift you, which a lot of the British ones are now household names because of London 2012.
Oh, that's awesome. I love that good sport attitude that you've grown into. Definitely your journey has brought you there through your challenges, your adversity, your relationships. It's the relationship with yourself, that people have to understand that, the way you talked and thought has adjusted and changed on who you became as you moved forward in your world. I think that's great. You put in a lot of great stuff there for people to understand. So let's get into this. You're a mindset coaching, you know, with people regarding their diet. So, which I believe your diet is definitely a part of everything that you're doing, right? You want to make sure you have the proper energy, the proper focus, the proper, you as I always say, your body is your temple. Take care of your temple and it'll take care of you, right? So talk a little bit about how you're using that mindset in coaching and you're helping people with their diet.
Just getting to look at their habits and their behaviors. And that's irrespective of being in the kitchen. That's looking at it across the board, from sleep to mood to how much social media you're consuming, how much news, and it doesn't even have to be clients. It'd be people I have a conversation with. It's like how much if you're low mood, how much news are you consuming? Because I don't watch as much as some of my family do, but that's because I know that it affects my emotions. So it's like, well,
Absolutely.
I might as well. What can I control? Uh, Twitter was one that one's the devil because pretty much you could be never ending scrolling on whatever topic it is. And I've obviously become more accountable to myself. It's like, well, okay, it's all right to maybe read 2 to maybe 5 comments or articles. That's it, because ultimately it's not helping you uh, with the when it comes to pessimism of worst case scenario of, well, it is the worst case scenario when it comes to this is ultimately death. But and most people don't want to go there. But when it comes to that, and we rewind back to what you asked me, Robert, is looking at well, why are you resorting to fast food? Why are you resorting to takeaways? Why are you resorting to raiding the biscuit or cookie jar? Why are you snacking or grazing in front of the television? Why are you loathing certain aspects of movement. I'm not going to call it exercise or training, um, and things like that, and delve and get people to actually question themselves. And some people want to go there, some people don't. Some people might think they want to transform themselves. Sometimes they're not ready for it because I've asked a difficult question. Okay, you don't want to go there. So some conversations I've had with people, they've run with their tails between the legs because they don't want to deal with that. Um, I'll call it a situation because it's difficult, and pretty much I won't say all times in my life I've ran straight headfirst into those situations. I'd be lying if that was the case. But if it's something minor and minute, it's better to grasp it then than it being something major. And I'm no different. I've struggled with mental health, and well, even the pandemic wasn't the best for me, and that's probably where I've not fully overcome it, and I've obviously seek support with that to be able to do it a different way. Previously, it was holistically, but that was because uh, I buried something from years ago, and I only really dealt with it like 9 years after I retired, and I would, if I was to give any piece of advice to an athlete, don't do that, because I kind of sectioned it off. So I'll deal with that in years to come, and it obviously, as we use the analogy, you brush something over the carpet, you're
Yeah,
gonna
but
trip
that
over it
always comes
eventually.
back to haunt you, as they say, right?
So it was there waiting for me, and body was having panic attacks, and I didn't know what they were. And then I had one when I was working a day job. It was about 2 years ago, and I working in education. I blame the job, and it wasn't. I think the body kind of went, "Well, you're not listening to this, that. Oh, let's make it really bad," and then you might actually take notice because you take importance with it when it comes to your health. And I wasn't taking care of myself. It was I let the job pretty much derail me, and I think on reflection, what I should have stayed stern fast to was the day how I went into the job as well. Why are kids going to school with a chocolate bar? Because within my day job, that's unacceptable. As well, this is behavior. As well, okay, this is a solution, but what is the actual problem that they're trying to not get over? So sleep or whatever it is has not been addressed. You're just masking it. So if I was to use it for an adult, coffee, some sort of stimulant, Red Bull or an energy drink or something, maybe even more extreme. This is still the problem. You're not addressing the sleep,
Hmm.
and for me, I probably became institutionalized and kind of accepted some things, and I pretty much was eating to survive, just to get through the day, and be, Coke. I'm not talking drug. I'm talking the drink now. And anything I could come by to, like, to boost energy. And I pretty much became something that unrecognizable. And I jumped on the scale one time, and I was like, I've never been this heavy in my life. And pretty much it was like a wake up. It's like, this is not acceptable, Jim. You need to do something about it. So when I came back the following September to work, people are like, oh, you lost a lot of weight. But because I was struggling, I'd obviously done it too drastically, and I wasn't going outside the house. So I'd become like a recluse. I'd pretty much gone from one extreme to lots and lots of sugar to go, what's the term I want to use? Cold turkey. I
Mm,
wouldn't say that. Do whatever it is. Do not do something like that because it's for the body. It doesn't
a
know if it's
shock.
coming or go. It's a massive shock
Yeah.
to pretty much build my tolerance back up to carbohydrates in general because my body was reacting to an energy source and I'd have a panic attack. why am I having a panic attack? Now, obviously, I know why. It's like, well, your body's thinking that it's bad when in fact it's just getting it uh, an injection of energy. Obviously, depending on what it is. If it's something quick, it's going to be instant. And I didn't know why that was happening. And I think when I came back, I rationally couldn't contemplate what people were saying because you're saying, well, you look ill in my mind, not what they were saying. So I think as I got better and was eating a bit better and my mental health was improving, I would question people, what do you mean by that? Because I'm a quite healthy person. So if you say my face looks thin, in my brain that thinks you thinking that I'm jaundice or something like that, something wrong with me. So I'll get them to I don't know, not dumb it down, but as if I was a child, explain to me what is going through your mind as what seems to be wrong with me. In because I would say the better way would be, well, you were fat before. Okay, I can accept that. That'd be okay. This is what I've done. Not congratulate you, which would be, well, you look like you lose weight. Well, why don't you congratulate? I was fat and I've done something about it. That's good. That's to be commended, not to be
Shunned.
shunned and pointed at as, well, if
Yep.
he's done something
I
different.
think
And I've
a society has a problem with congratulating people
mm,
because they're reversing that image to themselves, saying, screw him. Like, wow, he just thinks he's better than us, right? So it becomes more of a reflection of what are you doing? So a lot of people don't want to congratulate. They don't want to say someone's going on vacation, for example. They're jealous, for example. You know what I mean? Instead of, oh, I'm so awesome. You deserve this because I know how hard you work. I know what you're doing. So it's definitely a mindset stuff. I love how you brought in habits. Habits are massive. Habits, habits in everything that you do and you're talking about food habits and you're connecting it with the core, issues of what is that person doing? What are their habits and how is it affecting, the direction that they want to go, right? But habits, you had good habits to make it to the Paralympics, right? You had good habits to do that training on a daily basis, discipline, making it happen even on your shitty days, right? Those are
well,
your
that comes down to foundations, and this is something I've had to learn with obviously talking to human beings to because not everybody has that foundational base or good
Mhm.
base of. I use analogy now of, if you build up a shitty house, and we'll use Florida, and you have a hurricane come through, that house is not going to be standing for very long because it's got shitty foundations. But for me, that's built on, good coaches, good support network, my family. Pretty, dieting was something that is unknown to me because my mum went on a diet 25 years ago to lose a bit of weight. But that was a lifestyle change within my household of, drinking more water, not having sodas and things like that. So me drinking water now is autopilot. Go to
right,
the tap, fill up a bottle of water, drink water. Yes, I will have the occasional soft drink. I wouldn't. I'd be lying if my industry, obviously, it's a myth otherwise, because the person's only showing one half of their life, which I loathe of social media to be like, well, that's nobody's perfect of
hmm
365 days a year, and they're most being more transparent. It's like, well, these are photos I took on a photo shoot and I've spread them across the year. Okay, I can accept that. That's you being somewhat transparent, but it's still lying to somebody that maybe not seen a documentary about it. And I think it's a science in itself to probe people to go looking at their habits and their behavior and going deeper as well. You not liking, for example, green vegetables. Well, where does that stem from? Is it being, if we use historical data to do it, is it because your parents made you sit at the table and things in my household? It was, you try it once, and then if you don't like it, that's okay. You've tried it, and that would be come down to parsnips, Brussels sprouts. I loathed that vegetable when I was a kid, but I was willing to try one. Okay, I don't quite like the texture or the taste. In my household, that was fine. You tried it, you didn't like it, okay. I eat them now as an adult, but it was that relationship with food that people ask me, well, what's your favorite food? I'll try anything to that habits and behaviors that I was instilled as a kid. Not everybody has that, so it's probing. Some people will like it. Some people detest being prodded and probed. It's like, well, where are you going with this, James? Who's gonna get this? Yeah, but until I diagnose what is actually wrong with you, well, not wrong with you, but in terms of what is the actual problem, not the BS one that you want, of having a six pack or all the things that were ideal in before the pandemic of looking a certain way for a certain function, to not motivate you to get up on a crappy day, because your motivation is gonna ebb and flow, because it's like, oh, today I can't be asked.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. That was great. Well said. Where can people find you on social media, James?
You can find me on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, all prefix James O Roberts 11. On my new website, www.jamesowenroberts.com, and also my podcast, The Mindset Athlete, or you can find on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, or Spotify, or anywhere that you listen to podcasts.
Excellent, excellent. I want everybody to listen to James Owen Roberts' podcast. Check it out, see what he's up to. Share this message. Share his story, his journey. And as you can see, he gets into habits, he gets into mindset, he gets into the core issue of what's going on with his clients. I want to also welcome you to subscribe to the Robert Timmons Show. Every week we have amazing people like James come on here, share their story, and empower you, the listener. I want to thank you, James, for being on the show today.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me, Robert. It's been my privilege.
Hey guys, thanks for sticking around. If you'd like to see more podcast interviews, you can check them out right here. They're exactly what you need to hear next. And if you're new here, hit subscribe and become part of the community, and tell me what you think about the podcast interviews in the comments below. I read all of them every week, and join my Mind Power Mastery group by hitting the link in the description.